Welcome to Nice and Blunt. My name is Adam Riancho, and it's time for part 2 of my running back rankings for 2024. These are the top 20. We're going to kick it off at number 11, and as always, these rankings are intended for half PPR formats. But DeVon Achane is my RB11 this year, and he had truly elite upside that was showcased in 2023 as a rookie. He only played 11 games, but he did put up 997 total yards on 7.8 yards per carry. Also, he scored 11 touchdowns. Meanwhile, Raheem Mostert did get a contract extension, but is 32 years old and scored 21 touchdowns of his own last season. So this offense is prolific in the run game. Miami was ranked number 6 in rushing yards with 136 per game, number 1 in yards per carry with 5.1, in large part thanks to Achane, and tied for first in rushing touchdowns with 27. We know there were even more in the passing game. So no matter who carries the rock, they put up a ton of fantasy points on the ground in Mike McDaniel's offense, and you want a piece of the Miami backfield, and Mostert does not catch passes. So Achane, if he stays healthy, is possibly ranked too low, but he's also listed at 5'9", 188 pounds with 4.32 speed, and was unable to finish 8 games as a rookie. We have to assume more volume is coming in year 2 and take away production from Mostert, but they did draft Jalen Wright for a reason. He's probably just an insurance policy as a rookie though, and at least at this point, without any training camp news regarding him, I'm not factoring him in to this backfield. So I'm expecting Achane to take a leap and to take over above Mostert. But regardless, this committee offers elite upside, and Achane is the most valuable one, in my opinion. He is a boom-bust option, though, and that appeal may not exactly pay off in season long given his high price tag, but does offer more value in best ball, where he's going as running back 7 on Underdog, 25th overall. Good luck. I hope he stays healthy. If he does, he could win you your league. And that's why I consider him in the same tier as the last 3 players in my top 10 video. I see him equally as valuable as Pacheco, Etienne, and Henry. They're all in the same tier. I just have Achane at the bottom because of his injury risk and the committee that he plays in. But moving on to RB12, we enter a new tier altogether, and these are my safe running back 2s this season. At number 12, I have James Cook of the Buffalo Bills, and I think half of his season is kind of irrelevant last year with Ken Dorsey as the offensive coordinator. They fired him after that loss to the Broncos, and that's why I'm going to cherry pick and take the 9 games that Cook played under Joe Brady. That includes the playoffs. He averaged 20.1 touches per game, 3.1 receptions per game, 99.6 yards per game, 4.3 yards per carry, and did score 4 touchdowns in this 9-game sample size. That's an average of 14.2 points per game, and it's not that far off of players like Etienne last season. So really excited about James Cook, but there is a concern that Josh Allen remains the goal line back. Allen scored 15 rushing touchdowns in 2023, and that's pretty much the biggest red flag that you can name for Cook. He's going to lose touches on the goal line. But there is a factor that a lot of players left this Buffalo offense, and between Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, and Latavius Murray, there are 23 total touchdowns vacated from last year. Not all of those are going to go to Kincaid, Curtis Samuel, Keon Coleman. Some of them will go to James Cook. So hopefully the run-first approach that we saw under Joe Brady is likely going to continue, and Cook does not offer top 5 upside, but he does have a top 15 floor when he's healthy, and we also saw some massive potential when he dominated the Cowboys in that winter game last year. Specifically in that matchup, he put up 35.1 fantasy points on 27 touches, only 2 receptions, but scored 2 touchdowns and also had 221 total yards against a really good rushing defense. So he is talented, he does have potential, but rookie Ray Davis is a possible threat. In 2023 at the University of Kentucky, Ray Davis did score 20 touchdowns. So I'm really hoping he doesn't vulture more touchdown looks for Cook. He'll probably have a few of his own, but I doubt that the late 4th round pick ruins Cook's value, and that's why I have him at the top of this tier as my RB12. Moving forward, at number 13, I have Josh Jacobs, who did see a massive dip in production last year in Vegas. He only played 13 games, only ran for 3.5 yards per carry, but volume carried him. He had 20.8 touches per game, 2.8 receptions per game, 85 yards per game, and 6 touchdowns that put up an average of 12.7 fantasy points per game. So nothing elite, but definitely solid. And he is still only 26 years old. He's moving over to Green Bay, which is a much better offense than Las Vegas, but they do have a ton of wide receiver and tight end weapons that are going to factor in to the equation. It is still a pass-first offense that scored only 5 running back touchdowns last year between Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, but Jacobs does catch passes. I think that's an underrated part of his game. He also got paid 4 years, $48 million, but when you look at it a little closer, only one of those seasons, $12.5 million, is guaranteed. So it's possible that they move off of him next year. That $48 million number is a little misleading. I think he'll be a high-end running back too, though, with upside this season. However, he's not going to reclaim that top 3 elite potential that we saw from him 2 years ago. It's a crowded offense, and there is a slight committee approach that Matt LaFleur has hinted he wants to lean into. A.J. Dillon's still there, but I'm mostly worried about the talented rookie Marshawn Lloyd out of USC. Lloyd is 22 years old. He was a 3rd-round pick. He's listed at 5'9", 220 pounds with 4.46 speed, and I think he's more explosive than Josh Jacobs. But he's going to be looming in the backfield, ready to steal goal line looks and targets. I just don't worry about him too much as a rookie. I think it will be a much bigger factor in 2025. So that's why Jacobs is still my RB13 this season. I prefer James Cook, but I think Jacobs' price tag in the 5th round is perfectly fine, an appropriate value where he's going. At running back 14, though, I have Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who was actually not that efficient on the ground last year. He only ran for 3.6 yards per carry, one of the lowest numbers in the NFL. But he had so much volume, it didn't really matter. 272 rush attempts, 70 targets, 64 catches. That's a catch percentage of 91%. And 8.6 yards per reception helped lead him to 1,539 total yards and 9 touchdowns last year. On a per-game basis, that's 19.8 touches per game, 3.8 receptions per game, 91 yards per game, and 14.1 fantasy points per game. So he was actually really underrated. He helped a lot of teams win their championship, and he could do it again. That's why I have him as a top 15 option, but it is worth noting Tampa Bay lost Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator. He's now the head coach in Carolina, and I don't see a massive dip in production, but I don't see him being any better than he was last season either. Last year they won 9 games. I have them projected for 8 wins this season, and the only threat for volume is Bucky Irving. Last year, though, there was nobody competing for touches behind him. And Bucky Irving is a big threat in the passing game. He caught 87 catches over the last 2 seasons at Oregon. And if you look at just specifically last season, Bucky Irving caught 56 catches. That's definitely his specialty. So while Rachaad's value is still probably pretty good, it's mostly contingent on the touchdowns, and more specifically, his passing volume, which is likely to take a hit this year because of Bucky Irving. However, Irving is 21 years old, a late 4th-round pick, listed at 5'9", 192 pounds, 4.55 speed, so nothing like elite. And that's why I think the goal line touches for Rachaad are still secure, and I think 10 or so touchdowns is probably likely to repeat. So I still trust him, but like Jacobs, I think he's a very safe high-end RB2. However, that top 5 upside is just lacking. Moving on, though, to RB15 in my rankings, I have Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks, and Walker scored 13.1 points per game in 14 fully healthy games in 2023. He was averaging 17.4 touches per game, 2 receptions per game, 82 yards per game, and scored 9 touchdowns. However, he did get injured in Week 10, and if you look at the first 9 games when he was fully healthy before that injury, he was averaging 14.1 points per game, a little bit better. So he fell off just slightly after the injury, but that's because Charbonnet is his backup. Zach Charbonnet is a top 5 backup in the NFL, if not arguably the best backup running back you could find. So that does hurt his value, especially in the passing game, but it also gives Walker some contingent upside if Charbonnet were to go down. He would instantly be a top 10 running back, possibly top 5, and if you look at his rookie season, in 10 full games when he was the starter, he was prolific. He averaged 22.3 touches per game, 2.1 receptions per game, 102 yards from scrimmage per game, and 8 touchdowns in those 10 games, an average of 16.1 half PPR points per game. So those are Jonathan Taylor type of numbers, and while he could do that again, he just needs Charbonnet off the field in order for that to happen. But regardless, he's a very safe running back too. However, just like everyone else in this tier, he's touchdown dependent for that top 10 upside. He's still only 23 years old though, entering year 3 listed at 5'9", 211 pounds with 4.39 speed. You don't find that every day, and he's probably the running back in this tier that offers the most league-winning value, but he's also the player that has the best backup to compete with. So that's why I have him at middle of the pack in this tier at RB15. I think he's a good value in round 6, but maybe not the best option given Charbonnet is a thorn in his side. Moving on, sticking in the same tier, I have Joe Mixon as my running back 16. And in 2023, Mixon scored 14.1 points per game. That's running back 13 on a per game basis. Speaking of per game stats, that's 18.2 touches per game, 3.1 catches per game, 83 total yards per game. And with 12 total touchdowns, he does offer a lot of upside. But that was on a completely different team. He's now been traded to the Houston Texans. And if you look a little closer, he's been somewhat inefficient over the course of his career. His yards per carry is only 4.1. And over the last 5 straight seasons, his maximum yards per carry is 4.1, if not less. So not great. It's trending in the wrong direction. But where he is most valuable is on the goal line and in the passing game, where over the last 3 years in Cincinnati, Joe Mixon has scored 37 touchdowns, averaging 3.3 catches per game. The question is, will a crowded Houston offense offer him the same production at age 28? If he's healthy, I think so. But we might see a slight dip in touchdowns because Devin Singletary, when he was the starter in 10 games, only scored 4 touchdowns himself. I do think Mixon is more talented, but this volume is a little bit hard to project for him. Singletary was seeing 19 touches per game. That's quite a lot. Catching 2.3 receptions per game, so maybe there's fewer targets available for Mixon this year. And did put up a total 87 yards. That's kind of similar to what we saw from Mixon in a similar type of volume. So decent numbers, but only an average of 12.2 points per game. If the touchdowns drop off for Mixon, he's going to be more of a low-end RB2. That's why I don't have him ranked as high as he finished last season. We are expecting a pass-first offense in Houston, but despite the coach speak, I don't really expect Dameon Pierce to be much of a threat for touches after an abysmal season in 2023. So Mixon should maintain consistent RB2 production with top 10 upside when he does score touchdowns. But if he gets hurt at age 28, or somehow Dameon Pierce does become viable again, then there is some risk he falls to just a flex play, and that's why I'm not drafting a ton of Mixon when I can get Kenneth Walker a few picks later. They did give Mixon a contract extension, however, all the way through 2026, and I wouldn't worry about him yet this season, but he does feel like this could be the last year that you can trust him. Buyer beware. It's possible he falls off before we expect him to. So he should be fine, but at RB16, I do think there's a better value going later in Kenneth Walker. At number 17, though, the last player in this tier would be Alvin Kamara. But Kamara will be 29 years old in the 2024 season. He's also losing efficiency. Last season, he only ran for 3.9 yards per carry. However, he did lead all running backs in the NFL with 6.6 targets per game with Derek Carr as his quarterback. New Orleans, though, is a bad offense. They do have a new offensive coordinator, Kubiak, who's coming from San Francisco, which could help, but personally, I'm only predicting 4 wins for the Saints this season, so I'm not a believer. Kamara did average 14.6 points per game in 13 games last season. Remember, he was suspended for 3 games, then he didn't play in Week 18. And he was averaging 19.6 touches per game, 5.8 receptions per game, 89 yards per game, and did score 6 touchdowns. That's decent, but not amazing. He's the last name I'm somewhat comfortable drafting as my RB1, but last year, Kendre Miller was completely irrelevant as a rookie, so I do expect those numbers to come down. Kendre should see more volume in year 2. He's not a pass catcher, but is only 22 years old, listed at 5'11", 215 pounds, and did put up over 1,500 yards and 17 touchdowns as a junior for the TCU team that went to the national championship just 2 seasons ago. The Saints drafted him in the early 3rd round, and there is definitely a plan to get him involved sooner rather than later. So at 29 years old, Kamara does offer some risk, but I also think running back 17 could possibly be too low of a ranking if he does play a full 17 games in 2024. He's a high-risk, high-reward player being drafted in round 7, and it is worth noting I have drafted him as late as pick 91. He does fall to round 8 kind of consistently on Underdog. So that speaks to the hesitation that the fantasy community has surrounding him, but I think he's okay where he's going. I don't think he's a bad pick, just offers some risk because it's a bad offense, and Kendre Miller does have potential. Moving forward, though, we're entering the last tier of this video, and these are players that I'm a little bit hesitant towards, but still I think offer top 20 production this season. At number 18, I have David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions, and the big red flag here is obviously Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs is expected to see more volume in year 2, especially on the goal line, but Montgomery should still score at least 10 touchdowns like he did last season when he put up 13 in 14 games. This is a high-powered offense in Detroit, and if we look at Montgomery's stats last season, he scored 14.2 points per game on 16.8 touches per game, only 1.1 catch per game, but did average 81 yards per game and 13 total touchdowns. It is worth noting, though, that Gibbs did not score a touchdown until week 7, and he really started to take over in the second half. That really mitigated Montgomery's upside. If we cherry pick the stats for David Montgomery and look at just the final 9 regular season games, Montgomery did fall to just 12.8 points per game, and the volume in the passing game really being almost non-existent is a big reason why I am worried about him. In full PPR, he loses a lot of value. But there's a chance that the touchdowns start to dry up. I still think you're going to see double-digit touchdowns this season for him, but without it, the fantasy value would fall off a cliff, really. But the offense is good enough to support 2 top 20 running backs. However, Montgomery is just a floor play at the end of the day. But we also cannot ignore his contingent upside if Jahmyr Gibbs were to miss time. We mentioned that with other players, it's relevant in his case as well. And if that happens, Montgomery would become a top 10 running back option, but given Gibbs' youth, it's probably unlikely to happen. So at age 27, this might be his last productive season as a top 20 option. If you like him a lot, go ahead and draft him. But I was higher on him last year. I thought he was a top 15 option. This year, I have him at 18, and I kind of feel like I'm a little bit high, to be perfectly honest. This ranking might change. He might move down a little bit over the course of the offseason. But moving forward, running back 19 on this list is a player I really like, have drafted a lot, Zack Moss of the Cincinnati Bengals. This might be a controversial ranking to have him here this high, but this offense has historically offered a ton of fantasy value at the running back position. Mixon has found the end zone 37 times over the last 3 years, and last year that kept pace. He scored 12 touchdowns in 2023. So Zack Moss, listed at 5'9", 223 pounds, profiles as the goal line running back for the Bengals, a team I'm projecting for 12 wins. They're going to score a lot of points, and there's going to be a lot of touchdown opportunity for Zack Moss. With this ranking, Moss is definitely my bet to be the clear RB1 in Cincinnati, something he showed he can do in Indianapolis when Jonathan Taylor missed time. If we look at the 7 games, where Moss was the Colts starter last year. He averaged 15.6 points per game, saw 21.1 touches per game, 2.9 receptions per game for 98 yards per game, and also scored 5 touchdowns in that 7-game sample size. He was prolific. So while that does represent his upside, it's not my projection for him. I'm expecting somewhere around 16 touches per game, around 2 receptions per game, but I do expect 10 plus touchdowns for Moss in a high-powered offense. So that's why I rank him as a top 20 running back. Moss also got a 2-year, $8 million contract, which doesn't sound like a crazy amount, but at age 27, that's nearly going to double his career earnings, and I think he's going to be invigorated. I think he makes the most of this opportunity, and if you're worried about Chase Brown, yes, he is a talented, I understand, but last year, he only played 6 games with over 15% of the snaps as a rookie, and his only touchdown of the season was on an 80-yard reception. Otherwise, he barely cracked 4 yards per carry on only 44 rush attempts, and I just don't see it. After all, Chase Brown was a 5th-round pick out of Illinois, where he was a 5th-year senior, and he was on and off the field with injuries as a rookie. I just don't think they trust him enough where he's all of a sudden going to get 16 plus touches per game. I can only envision him as a 3rd down back in year 2. So after the production Zack Moss put up last season in Indianapolis, I'm definitely trusting him to win the Bengals job outright. And I think he's a great value in ADP, running back 26 on Underdog, going off the board 92nd overall. And if Chase Brown were to ever miss time with injury again, then I'd be ranking Zack Moss as a top 15 play in those weeks during the season. So there's possibly top 12 upside here, and he's one of my go-to draft picks when I need a running back in the 8th round. At RB19, I might be too low. But last player in this video, my running back 20 this season, is Rhamondre Stevenson. And there are reasons to be excited about Rhamondre despite a bad offense in New England. Rhamondre gets a new coach, a new 4-year contract extension, a new rookie quarterback, and a completely new offensive coordinator, Alex Van Pelt, who comes from Cleveland, an offense that historically relies on the running back position. So there is some good news here. In 2023, he was averaging 11.3 points per game in 11 full games. He was getting 16.7 touches per game. I think that might go up this year. He caught 3.4 receptions per game. He does get it done in the passing game. And he was averaging 74 total yards per game, and he did score 4 total touchdowns. That's not terrible, but he was only averaging 3.9 yards per carry as well. I would like to see the efficiency go up. However, they replaced backup Ezekiel Elliott with Antonio Gibson. Some people are worried about Gibson, but personally, I think that's good news. And in my opinion, Rhamondre is by far the best weapon on New England. Maybe rookie wide receiver Jalen Polk is another bright spot. I do like him a lot, but overall, I think there are reasons to expect a solid, productive year with a lot of opportunity for Rhamondre. I don't think he's going to split too many touches in this backfield. So despite the fact that the Patriots is projected to be one of the worst offenses in the NFL, thanks to volume, I think Rhamondre is a top 20 running back in 2024. So that's it for this video. A reminder on the list, I have DeVon Achane as RB11 in the previous tier with Pacheco, Etienne, Derrick Henry. But in the following tier, I have James Cook, followed by Josh Jacobs, followed by Rachaad White, Kenneth Walker, Joe Mixon, and Alvin Kamara. But in the final tier of this video, I have David Montgomery, Zack Moss, and Rhamondre Stevenson at RB20. So that's going to wrap it up. If you enjoyed, hit that like button for me and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. If you don't want to miss out on part 3, the top 30, then ring that notification bell, and I will see you in the next video. My name is Adam Riancho. Let me know in the comment section where you agree and disagree, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.